someone during the break was asking me about HPV. Can HPV be cured? Viruses are funny things. Viruses go up into your nerve system and reactivate when you're stressed. So once you have HPV, you do not get rid of it. It is with you for the rest of your life.
It's evident that he cares. What do you care about? Welcome to the Rock Newman Show. It's the Rock Newman Show.
The Minister of Wellness Ministries and Rock Newman Show 2.0 present free community health fair and seminar Saturday, March 18th, 2023 at Union Temple Baptist Church, Washington, D.C. RSVP before we reach capacity, dmvhealthfair.eventbrite.com or click the link in the description box. If you can't make it in person, no worries. You can purchase the live stream link by visiting theministerofwellness.com under healing services, or once again, just click that link in the description box. Calling all potential vendors, sponsors, or volunteers, please submit a contact form via theministerofwellness.com or call 888-847-8026. That's 888-847-8026. It's high time for a health revolution.
In this hour, we have gynecologist Dr. Yolanda Vaughan as our guest. We're going to be talking about women's health issues. Having Dr. Vaughan in this hour has new meaning for me personally. As of last night, 8:02, I got the news that my sister had made her transition. She had suffered for more than a year after being diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. I will let Dr. Vaughan talk about the various stages of cancer and the various kinds of detection that is available that obviously she did not have. It's obviously there's sadness as a result of her loss, but there's also a feeling that she suffers no more, and there is virtue and value in that. I dedicate today's show in her memory. She endured with such grace and dignity, never seeking sympathy. She was prepared for whatever her fate was going to be, and she's my shero. I love her dearly. She will rest in peace. Her children and her just cherished and precious grandchildren who loved her dearly. I know they're having a very tough time, but Uncle Rock loves you, and Uncle Rock will be here for you, and we're going to try to continue on in her spirit, which you know was a very strong, looking forward kind of spirit, a can-do kind of spirit. So, Dr. Yolanda Vaughan, thank you so very much for being on the Rock Newman Show, taking out of your time from your busy schedule to join us here.
Thank you.
First of all, tell us something about you. One of the things that I heard earlier, and I just loved hearing that, it was your saying, I'm a product of the D.C. public school system.
Absolutely, it can be done. I, was listening to your last guest. I think everyone needs to know that even though there is a disparity in education in this country, in my time, the library was always open, and the libraries are still open. Mm-hmm. And you are truly the one who decides which road you're going to take in your life. This is your journey, as James Baldwin says, this is your one life.
Yes.
So I think children need to know that even though they come from circumstances that may not necessarily be ideal, you have to search within yourself, and you need to know that no matter what situation or circumstances you're under, that there is hope and a way out for you. That is a legal route, an educational route, and education is always the key.
What was your dreams as a child to be a doctor?
No, my father told me when I was 10 I was going to be a doctor. I was a very compliant child. He came up and
Papa knew.
never was afforded the opportunity to go to medical school. He did graduate from North Carolina A&T.
Boom!
But he said, I always wanted to be a doctor. I couldn't be a doctor, so you're going to be my doctor.
Uh-huh. All
so
right.
I was his doctor.
Okay. Now, so going through the D.C. public schools, did you pay particular attention to chemistry and those kind of things that would be the preparatory courses for pursuing a career in the medical profession?
Absolutely. I knew that I loved health. I loved science. I loved the body, how it worked, and I loved seeing people get better. And I wanted to take a part or a role in healing, but I am not necessarily inclined to be a religious healer. So I said to myself, well, how can I help heal people and make people have a better life and live a healthier life? And that's where the sciences played that role for me.
Okay. And you graduated from medical school in North Carolina?
Yes, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill School of Medicine.
Were there any particular struggles there? I mean, you're in North Carolina, where still North Carolina today is North Carolina oftentimes of yesteryear.
My husband calls it the Deep South still.
Yeah. Yeah. How many blacks were in your graduating class from the medical school? Do you remember?
I can tell you perhaps 15.
15?
15.
Out of,
I believe that year we probably had 150 graduates.
okay. So about 10%.
Yes. Yes.
And as you were going through medical school, was it gynecology that you knew where you were headed, or was it somewhere later?
It was later when I did my medical school rotations, because when you're in medical school, the last 2 years of training is actually in the field on the job.
Okay.
I loved pediatrics, but I knew that pediatrics is a very, very complex field. A baby can't tell you what's wrong with it.
Right.
And you can, if you miss something, it can be absolutely devastating.
Sure.
Plus, mothers are hysterical when their children are sick.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed women.
Yeah.
Health. I enjoyed speaking and talking with women. I like the fact that they could verbalize what their problems were. For the most part, you're dealing with people all across the spectrum. You know, pediatrics generally stops at 18, and then the patients are pushed to primary care or gynecologist. Right. With gynecology, you can start when the child is 12, if they have an issue, on up to the time, senior citizen. So you learn a lot from your patients.
And just on that point right there, I want to get as much out of this hour as we can. I want my audience to learn as much as they possibly can from a true professional. On that point, you said you can start at 12 years old. So when typically should a parent start having their daughter specifically to see a gynecologist?
Well, the American College of OBGYN, which governs the obstetrician and gynecologists in this country and sets the protocols, recently changed their standards. They're asking us to see young women, actually at the age of 13 to 15, not for a pelvic exam, okay, but to actually educate these young women on their bodies, on the availability of certain vaccines to help prevent sexually transmitted diseases, on what they can expect as they go through puberty, what is normal, what is abnormal. After that first initial visit, unless the patient is sexually active, okay, we basically will do the first gynecological exam when they're 21. These are new standards. The first pap smear for women is now age 21. Now, a pap and a pelvic are not the same.
Okay, and I am ignorant.
If you are sexually active,
Right.
or if you have an issue and you're younger than 21, you do need a pelvic exam for cultures for sexually transmitted diseases. The pap smear is checking solely for cervical cancer, and that is to be done at the age 21 and up. So if you have a young lady who comes to you, you're a mom, and she says, "Mom, I'm sexually active," she should go in to see the gynecologist. She should have a pelvic exam to be cultured for sexually transmitted diseases. However, the first pap smear is not until age 21.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, there's a whole gamut of different cultures that can be done on the patient at that juncture. But the first pap is at 21. 21 and up, they do get the pap smear. The pap smear is checking for the presence of abnormal cells on the cervix. We do know now through research that cervical cancer is caused by a sexually transmitted disease. Let me say that again.
Say it, please. Listen,
Cervical
please.
cancer is caused by a sexually transmitted disease. The HPV virus causes cervical cancer. If you have HPV, you are at risk for cervical cancer if you have a high-risk subtype. And for men, if your significant other is positive for high-risk HPV and you participate in oral intercourse, you are at risk for cancer of the oral pharynx.
So, folks, maybe you were pouring some sugar frosted flakes or something like that. I'm going to ask you to repeat that, please, because I think it's critically important to our community, to all communities.
Cervical cancer is caused by the HPV virus. The HPV virus is a sexually transmitted infection. HPV 16 and 18 are high-risk subtypes that cause 70% of cervical cancers. The other 30% are caused by other high-risk subtypes of HPV. If you have cervical cancer, you have HPV. End of discussion. If you have oral intercourse as a male, female, whatever, with someone who has HPV on their cervix, you are at risk for cancer of the oral pharynx.
Now, the oral pharynx is
the throat.
Yes.
And oftentimes we're finding that the partners of people who do have sexual intercourse orally with people who have HPV on their cervix, by the time it's actually diagnosed, it's stage 4, oral cancer. These are studies that have been done. You have to realize the history of cervical cancer. For years, we did not know what caused it. We thought it was herpes. And I was actually privileged to study under a man, Dr. Hans Krebs, who's now retired, who's the leading gynecological oncologist in Northern Virginia. He recently retired. But when he was down at Medical College of Virginia, where I did my residency, we actually took biopsies from patients, and they were sent off to Germany to search for the subtype and the cause of the virus. We knew it was viral mediated, but at some juncture, people thought that it was herpes. No, he was one of the pioneers that said this disease is caused by HPV.
Yeah.
This is why you have the Gardasil vaccine now being offered for children. Not just women now, not just little girls, but little boys now can get the Gardasil vaccine to protect them from HPV. It starts at age 9 to age 26.
You know, there are a lot of studies done. People do research, a whole lot of studies. People get called up on the phone. They try to get answers about when children are becoming sexually active now, especially girls.
Right.
We hear those reports. You are a doctor, and you know firsthand. What age of kids starting to have sex these days?
A study was done approximately 2 years anonymously, and they did basically canvass the schools and ask these children, when did you start having sexual intercourse? Generally from age 10 to 13. And children are participating in oral intercourse. And this is what was actually grouped together as sexual intercourse. They included oral intercourse, vaginal, any type of intercourse, 10 to 13, average age.
My guest is Dr. Yolanda Vaughan, gynecologist extraordinaire. We will be coming back and talking about all things related to women's health after these brief messages.
And now, The Rock Newman Show.
Welcome back, folks. My guest, Dr. Yolanda Vaughan, she has practiced gynecology for the last 28 years. She's a lady that knows what she's talking about. While we were on the break, I was sharing that I think, and I don't know all of my sister's, sort of personal medical history, but I think that she went many, many years, 10, I don't know, but I remember hearing a discussion that makes me think that it was really more than a decade without as I call it, female examination. And you were saying?
Well, that's not unusual sometimes for postmenopausal women. Unfortunately, if they do have Medicare doesn't cover gynecological visits for women, except one. Initially, a lot of patients don't know. They think, when I get Medicare, it's going to be wonderful, panacea, everything. Not necessarily. And the recommendations now are for ACOG that if a person has no history of any cervical issue in the last 20 years, basically they can go without a pap smear, without an exam, period, end of discussion until they go to see the maker or the baker. I have issues with that. I do follow ACOG's recommendations.
And ACOG is?
The American College of OBGYN. Once you become board certified, which means that not only have you finished medical school, you went through a residency program. After that, you actually have to sit for a board exam. And then again, another exam to say, I am board certified. Once you become board certified, there's certain organizations in the medical community that you are a member of and you adhere to their regulations. And if you go outside of those regulations, you're not necessarily frowned upon because you have to individualize treatment for each patient. But you still have to be able to say that for the vast majority of my patients, I am following ACOG guidelines. However, patients who, like your sister, who have gone 20 years without an exam, she probably presented with the hallmark symptoms of ovarian cancer: bloating, just feeling full, lower abdominal pressure. Any physician who has a woman who's postmenopausal and they're seeing her, and usually these patients are still going in to see their primary care physicians once a year because some of them are on cardiac medications, they have to be regulated. Once you hear that hallmark of symptoms, the one thing that must be done, hands down, for your patient, besides a physical exam, is a pelvic ultrasound. To diagnose ovarian cancer, you must do a pelvic ultrasound. The ultrasound will show the ovaries, and it will let you know if there's an abnormality there. Now, it's not a 100% thing. Ovarian cancer occurs, if you look at all women, 1 in 70 in her lifetime will get ovarian cancer. The problem is, by the time it's diagnosed, it's usually in a progressive stage. Only 20% of those cancers are diagnosed in stage 1. If they are diagnosed in stage 1, your cure rate is 90%.
Oh, so detection.
Detection is the key. The other thing you want to do is a CA-125. The CA-125 blood test will detect a certain number of ovarian cancer. Now, some of them will not be detected, but the one that's the vast majority It'll detect if it's elevated, something is wrong. Ovarian cancer is a very, very strange type of gynecological cancer because it's a surface spreader, which means that once that ovary, the capsule pops and those cells get loose, they adhere to any tissue that comes against it. So they'll adhere to the bowel. They don't need the bloodstream to be carried throughout the body. They will just attach themselves. And that's how you end up with the ascites, the bloating. That's fluid from the tumor. Right. And when you see a woman who has these symptoms, you must order those tests. And when those patients are diagnosed with ovarian cancer, they must go to a tertiary care center. By that I mean the big healthcare centers. And this is where we get into the disparity in the African American community with healthcare.
Yes.
We will want to stay in our community with our community doctor because Dr. So-and-so took care of everybody. No. Mm-hmm. Get in your car and go. Mm-hmm. Because the professors, the learned people, the people who have the protocols, the people who are on the cutting edge of treatment for your cancer are not going to be at community hospitals. They're at the big centers. They're at the Hopkins. They're at the Georgetown Lombardi Cancer Center. They're at Fairfax. They're George Washington. They're not at the local hospital. So please, once you have this diagnosis, do not limit yourself to your even for your chemo if you need it. Take the drive. That can save your life.
Yes. There's so much to talk about.
Yeah, there is.
You talk. Prevention cannot be stressed enough. Now, prevention is being examined, which brings me to a point as to how we even initially had this conversation when I say prevention means being examined.
Exactly.
This started off, today's segment really started off before I contacted you. We had a guest who was also a gynecologist, and she was going to talk about a recent history of gynecological abuse by a male gynecologist and sort of its history. I don't necessarily want to so much go into the history of gynecological abuse now, but some of it does exist.
Exactly.
What I find fascinating, and I hadn't heard before, now it's not something I paid a lot of attention to, but clearly from where I sit, I hadn't heard of it. But I've heard your patients say that you are very inviting, not just for them in welcoming them as the woman, but you invite their significant other, the man, the husband, the boyfriend, into the exam room also, where you can discuss this with both of them. Why?
You know, everyone in every situation, every patient has a loved one, a person who is interested in their care. Very unusual to find people who are isolated islands. And I always tell my staff, if someone has a belly button, that means they belong to someone. And if someone takes the time to come in with a patient, to be available for the patient, they need to be informed, if the patient agrees to have them in there, as to what's going on with the situation. Significant others, family members, have been my saving grace, because oftentimes some of my patients can be a little stubborn with their health care. And they don't want to pursue certain avenues that I know will lead to them becoming more healthy. And I will purposely ask for them to bring in their husbands or their significant others, because oftentimes that's what it takes to get them to do what's best for them.
Yeah, because we love and care for other people and oftentimes don't care for ourselves.
And by the time their husband starts shooting eyes in their direction and they look at me and say, oh, she's going to do exactly what you said, doctor. I said, thank you. This has made my life a lot easier. I think sometimes women get so involved, particularly, I can say, and I heard this term before, And I'll state it because I say it to my husband and myself. I think sometimes African American women are everybody's mule. We do everything. We run around. We take care of everybody. We're always, we have to do this for the kids. We have to do this for the husband. We have to do this for the job. And we don't take care of ourselves. Right. And I also heard this term recently. If you love your children, take care of their mother.
Yeah.
You cannot be 150% for anyone if you're not healthy and taking care of yourself.
Right.
So I invite the significant others in, because I can often get more done with them helping me with the patient.
I had a post on Facebook when I promoted that you were going to be on today, that we were going to be talking about women issues.
Oh, no.
And the gentleman said, he said, I gave advice via Facebook just recently, and we were talking about a woman's menstrual cycle. And I opined on it, and I really got called sexist. And what he said is that he had done some research for some project somewhere in the past and found that many women who had severe menstrual cycles were deficient in calcium, and that upon him doing that research, he prescribed it for several friends. He told several friends, increase your calcium intake. And there was a 100% consistency in the 4 or 5 people that he had that conversation with. They started taking calcium, and they stopped having the severe cramps that they had. What say you?
I say that that's definitely not a scientific-based study.
Okay,
he
I say
has
so
a
too.
very small cohort, and I can tell you that if you look across the board, most people are calcium deficient, because for years we were telling people stay out of the sun, and a lot of people, particularly women, tend to be lactose intolerant. I know I am, and African Americans tend to be more lactose intolerant. We're going to have less intake of dairy products, because if something we take in makes us get gas and we're bloated, we're not going to necessarily eat it all the time. So across the board, most women are calcium deficient. I can tell you with some degree of certainty that giving calcium to women with dysmenorrhea or bad menstrual cramps across the board is not going to cure 99% of them. He had a small cohort, God bless them, I'm glad they're better, but that usually is not going to stop their pain, their heavy menses. That won't do it, just giving them calcium. And if you advocate that, if I were to advocate that to my patients, they would look at me and say, have you lost your mind? I need some help.
And so what causes it? Those terrible times of the month, what causes that?
Multifactorial. You have some patients who definitely have endometriosis, which it means that they have a condition where the menstrual glands actually will find their way outside of the lining of the uterus and implant in the pelvis. When this happens, those patients have severe pain, severe menstrual cramps. There is a triad we look for: dyspareunia, which means painful intercourse, dysmenorrhea, which means painful menses, and infertility. That's the triad of endometriosis. So that's one cause. Another cause can be fibroids. Fibroids runs rampant in the African American community. 30 to 40% of women, by the time they get into their 30s and 40s, will have some degree of fibroid tumor in their uterus. That is another cause of severe pain. Then you also have a class of people, we never know why they have bad cycles. From the time they first start having their cycles, they start having nausea and vomiting. They miss time from school. The mother will bring the patient in and say, this child has missed 10 days a month out of school for her cycles, and they're about to say she can't be promoted. And we'll do a workup on the patient, and they'll say, ma'am, your daughter falls in the category, we don't know why she has bad cycles, but we can treat the problem. So the vast majority of women, you will never know why they have heavy, bad, painful menses.
A male member of my staff, when we were talking about this show, he sort of jokingly said, well, ask the good doctor, what's the correlation between a woman's time of the month and her having a bad attitude for 4 or 5 days. Now, sort of jokingly said that, but, you know, my father was one famous for saying, many true words spoke in a joke are true. Tell me about the correlation.
Well, being a woman and being one who's had a menstrual cycle, I don't think anyone would advocate that it's fun to bleed for 4 to 5 days. It just is not anything that anyone would sign up and say, oh, yeah, I would like to take this amount of time out of the month, 4 to 5 days, and have red stuff pouring out of me and not be able to wear the clothes I want and not be able to feel good and have my uterus cramping and trying to stand up in the meeting in a business suit.
Listen up,
and I have
fellas.
this heavy cramp, or go home after I've been working all day with my briefcase and my stilettos on, have to cook for you and your children, and then have to periodically between cooking run to the restroom, change the bed, come back. That is not a good day for anybody. So any man who says, well, the cycle, whenever she's on the cycle, I can tell because she's in a bad mood. Oh, yeah, you think? Yes. Okay? Yes, I'm in a bad mood. And every month, once a month, I'm going to be in a bad mood, so adjust. Just think of this. This is 1 week out of the month. You have a good woman the rest of the time, 21 days of the month. You're blessed.
Fellas, do you need a repeat? No, I think you heard that. Do you have your answer? I should call his name, but I won't. Maybe I will when I come back for the next segment after these messages on The Rock Newman Show. And I have a powerhouse at the table with me here this morning, Dr. Yolanda Vaughan. She has practiced gynecology for the last 28 years. Dr. Vaughan, we've talked about a variety of issues here. Can you please tell me what it is, if you were giving a speech to a group of young women, what it is you would say to them that they need to be aware of, what kind of practices they should participate in, so on and so forth?
Number one, be proactive about your health. And by that I mean use the internet wisely. The internet is for information, not necessarily education. Because when you go online and people have different symptoms, they're going to have different ways that the approach was made to them by different physicians. But you are an individual. Okay? Unless you have an identical twin, your DNA is different from everybody else's. So the way the physician approaches you should be in an individualized manner. Also, if you walk in and you feel uncomfortable with the doctor, it's probably not the doctor for you. If you can't ask questions, if you don't feel free to discuss things about your sexuality, about, who you have been intimate with, about your past practices, from a gynecological standpoint, you need to find another physician. Because you need to be able to walk in there and tell everything about your past that may impact on your physical and spiritual and emotional health. The other thing I would say that is very important that still doesn't seem to ring with young women, condoms. Let me say it again. Condoms. Why can't we use condoms? We are still not using condoms in the African American community. And it's not just the young ones. It's interesting because the little teenagers who have access to the condoms at the health department, they seem to be more educated about using them than my 20-year-olds and my elderly patients. I get in trouble with the patients who are 50 and 60 years old. In my practice, they're the ones with STDs.
50 and 60 years old.
50 and 60 because they think that the men in their generation do not have intercourse with younger women. Did they forget that Viagra and Cialis is on the market? Yes, they do. And when they do, they often don't use condoms and they bring it home to you. So I have had years of devastated women in my practice, 50 and 60 years old, because they have an illness that now they can't get rid of. The recommendations from ACOG between the ages of 19 and 64, STD testing every year. And that includes not just gonorrhea, chlamydia, the things that you think that, I can get a shot and it'll move on. Hepatitis C. We now have a serological blood test for herpes simplex 2. Genital herpes can be tested by blood. Okay? Mm-hmm. You also need to be checked for syphilis. In the DCPG community, syphilis is on the rise, and syphilis can kill you. So when you come in my office, I have what's called a blue plate special. And when I come up to my staff and say, Miss So-and-so's getting the blue plate, HIV, hepatitis C, syphilis, and herpes simplex 2 IgG. That is the blue plate special. That plus whatever cultures I've done during the pelvic exam will cover the vast majority of sexually transmitted diseases that can impact on your sexual health. Mm-hmm. Someone during the break was asking me about HPV. Can HPV be cured? Viruses are funny things. Viruses go up into your nerve system and reactivate when you're stressed. So once you have HPV, you do not get rid of it. It is with you for the rest of your life. It may go away from your cervix, okay? But if you become stressed out, it comes back down the nerve cells and plants itself on your cervix. That's why once you have a high-grade cervical problem that's close to cervical cancer, you, even though your PAPs may be negative after your treatment, the recommendation is for 20 years you have to have your pap smears. 20 years. If you are 65 years of age and you had an abnormality on your cervix that was precancerous and serious, you cannot stop having gynecological exams for 20 years.
In the 60s and 70s, when I came of age, that's how I'm going to put that. Mm-hmm. I never even heard of herpes until it was it was either the late 70s or the early 80s. Mm-hmm. And then there was a proliferation of hearing about this stuff that once you contract it, it never goes away. Mm-hmm. Why? Why was there, was it just undetected and not called that, but the symptoms were there early on? Do you know?
Rock and you and I lived through the sexual revolution. I tell my patients, the young ones, y'all missed it. You can't do what we used to do. I think that as people became more sexually active, these diseases cropped up. In the past, you did not have the remember, you could, who was the one, the lady who actually was promoting female sexuality and had the magazine up in New York?
Gloria Steinem?
Her, and was it Helen?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean,
Cosmopolitan.
Prior to that, you didn't, people were having sex, but it wasn't an open thing.
Right.
The more sex you have, the more sexually transmitted diseases you have. The more feeling you have that it's okay to have multiple sexual partners, the more it spreads. I believe that HIV wasn't heard of until the 70s. They tracked it to a Canadian who brought it to Canada, had a huge party with a bunch of his male friends. That's supposedly how HIV got into this country. HIV, the virus, is carried endemically in the South African green monkey. Mm-hmm. They harbor the HIV virus. So once people become more sexually active, you have more diseases, and you have proliferation of diseases. You have people who aren't educated about what's happening to their body. They are spreading the diseases, and that's how you see more disease.
Mm-hmm. So it is in part as a result of the sexual revolution?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would say. I
Okay.
would say.
Now, let me tell you what. Back on Facebook, promoting your visit here with us today. I got some public inquiries, but I also got some private inquiries.
Right.
And those private inquiries centered mostly around whether or not it is reality or myth that men reach their sexual peak in their late teens, early 20s, and women reach their sexual peak somewhere in their late 30s, early 40s.
Actually, the latter half is correct.
So women reach their sexual
Peak in their 40s.
in their 40s.
Men,
So in other words, and look, describing that in more layman's terms, that's when a woman is more likely to be horny.
I would say that would be when a woman is more likely to know what she wants and who can deliver it to her.
Okay. All right. Okay.
And makes the choices as to who she wants to deliver it to her. Men do reach their sexual peak at 18 to 20. Sorry, guys. After that, and oftentimes my patients will come in and they'll say, my significant other told me something must be wrong with me because I've never had an orgasm with him. And I say, there's nothing wrong with you. There's something wrong with your significant other because he doesn't know how to get you to orgasm.
So you blaming the dude?
Absolutely.
Really?
Absolutely.
Oh, then I would ask the question, has she ever given herself an orgasm?
Probably. Because she wasn't getting it from her partner. Women can achieve orgasm without the aid of a man and do it quite well. If you're in an intimate relationship and you're not reaching orgasm with your mate, your mate needs to make some adjustments. Oftentimes they're more into themselves. Once they get satisfied, they're like, okay, you find your way to where you're supposed to be. That's not the type of intimacy I want.
Yeah, so I once had a coach, and I even thought it was arcane thinking then. But his theory was, we start at the same time. If I finish before you do, it ain't my fault.
Yes, it is. And oftentimes, if you don't make some adjustments, she won't be with you much longer because she's going to find someone who was able to get her where she needs to be.
There was a song that had the name Jody Riley was in it. Jody might come there.
Oh, absolutely.
She was living out while you.
Yeah, I know my guy you're talking about. He died of a stroke. Yeah. Johnny Taylor. Yeah, absolutely.
So you said men reach their peak sort of early.
Very early.
Late teens.
Very early.
Early 20s.
Yes.
I remember Red Fox saying, I kind of want to take one of my earphones off. Red Fox said that there was one mistake that God made with the human body. And he said that whatever it was that God put in your ear, that when you pulled it down like this, that let it pop back up, he should have put that same thing in the man's penis.
Absolutely. I think that's why you saw such a propagation of male erectile medication to help you guys in your latter years, because there is a deficit as you get older. And that's around the same time when your mate is having a peak in her sexual performance. So there's this disparity. And I think what happened, unfortunately, once you men found out that things could work better again, you started tipping a little bit and going toward necessarily younger women. And that's where I see in my practice the propagation of sexually transmitted illnesses in the older population.
You know what? I did something on a show several shows back where we talked a little bit about the proliferation of using the sexual enhancing drugs like Viagra and the rest. And how many young men are starting to use it. I personally am aware of NBA players. It's almost like a drug of choice. The great journalist Tony Brown, many years ago, he opined that, basketball players who go out and they just sweat, for 48 minutes, that they were losing trace minerals and all the rest that was affecting their sexual performance. And I wonder, for example, if that's the case, because I was absolutely, I knew some, but then I was surprised to kind of hear the whisper of how many young men in their 20s, early 30s, are now turning to those drugs that enhance sexual performance.
But is that necessarily because their sexual peak is now that the drug is available to help their sexuality, to help their sexual well-being continue? Are these the same individuals that would, as young men do, start to see a decline in their sexual peak, who now have the option to go buy something that will help? Is that what is actually causing a bias in that study or that observation?
Yeah.
Perhaps, because, when you and I were coming around, you couldn't go buy Cialis or anything to help you out. If you got to 20 or 25 and you were having a decline in your sexual peak, you just had to kind of deal with it.
I remember hearing the comedian George Wallace in Las Vegas. George is a good friend of mine. And he was talking about Cialis and the commercial, and the commercial always ends with, if you have an erection that lasts for more than 4 hours, call your doctor. So George Wallace said, if I have an erection that lasts for more than 4 hours, I'm going to call Susie, then I'm going to call Jennifer, then I'm going to call Wanda, and Bob, if you're available, I might call. We had fun on the Rock Newman Show.
That's great.
I find it interesting, and I want to come back to this in the last minute and a half that we have here. You said kids are becoming sexually active between 10 and 13?
Yes.
When we were 10 and 13, I'll tell you, we just lied about it. We said we did it, and we didn't even know what doing it really meant, but we lied and said we did. I can tell you that. But 10 and 13 is the reality now?
That is the reality.
That's dangerous. That is dangerous.
It is very dangerous because most of the time they're uneducated. You'd be surprised at the number of parents who'll bring their children into me and say, teach them about sexuality and teach them about sex and teach them. And I'm saying to myself, okay, in this hour visit, you want me to explain to your daughter, who you've had for 12 or 13 years in your life, about her sexuality and what she should and should not do, what she should expose herself to. I think there's a disparity in parenting. I don't think necessarily that you're going to be able to have the impact on children that you had in the past with the media, Facebook. You have those things that are interfering with parenting, but we have to step up and be parents and educate these children at home, not depend on the teacher, not depend on the minister, not depend on the physician, to educate them about their sexuality and what can happen when they become sexually active. Because when they come in my office, I say, okay, if you're having sex and you're acting like a grown-up, now you have to have a grown-up exam.
How difficult is it for you in your profession, and you see these children, you see these people every single day that are dealing with real life issues, and you hear the religious community talk about abstinence and things that actually seem extraordinarily difficult to apply in the real world?
Well, I am very spiritual, very religious, but I deal with reality. I talk to my patients about spirituality, what I feel, is the best for them. I individualize. I understand the religious community. I understand what they're trying to advocate. There's nothing wrong with their approach. However, there is reality in life is that people are sexually active. And as my husband said to me when I went into a cataclysmic paralysis and I found out my son was sexually active and he had given him condoms, he said, sit down. You have to realize now there's death out there, so I have to give him condoms to protect himself. This is reality. So reality is they must be protected. Reality is unwanted pregnancy must be prevented in our community. This is one of the things I harbor on. And I want to close by saying the old Michael Jackson song, listen to it. The one he says, if you want to get started something, if you listen real closely, he'll say, If you can't feed the baby, then don't have the baby.
That's right. Can't feed the baby. Don't make the baby.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Vaughan. You were absolutely fantastic. Folks, thank you so much for listening, for viewing. Coming up next, E. Scott Bolden. Right back on The Rock Newman Show after.